Recently, Jujutsu Kaisen has been stuck in what many of us have affectionately come to call the Sukuna cycle. However, after 265 off the back of Yuji finally opening his domain, JJK took us on a very different and quite frankly a refreshing trip down memory lane with Yuji and Sukuna. So, let's talk about it.
Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
This chapter has a lot of yap, as my chat on Leaks and I coined the term yapter, and genuinely, they're not wrong. However, a lot of the dialogue happening between Sukuna and Yuji here isn't just as surface level as it may seem, so I want you all to sit down, grab your popcorn, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's just dive into all of this, because this chapter opens up with Yuji and Sukuna moving through what seems to be a subway station, I'm assuming here, and I'm certain that this will be based on a real-life location. However, I'm yet to discover which one, because apparently in my part-time, I'd like to fucking go around Japan on Google Maps and try and find these locations, because I'm a little bit fucking freaky like that. Anyway, Sukuna mentions how he has experienced this phenomenon before, and it usually happens with a sorcerer at the height of battle. And Sukuna mentions how he had thought that this was some sort of side effect from cursed energy being born from humans. Now, obviously, Sukuna here is talking about the experiences we've seen him have in moments like this with Chogo from Shibuya, then Kashimo and his fights just after Gojo, and then we saw Gojo have an experience similar to this. However, Sukuna wasn't actually present for that one, which Gojo's one seems very similar but also isolated at the same time. But Yuji's also had moments just like this with Todo, Choso, and even Mahito, transporting them all into this sort of strange, almost dreamlike state, these dream worlds. And we saw this happen with Choso as Choso died, which raises the question, does the sorcerer need to be in combat, in battle for this to occur, or can it happen during a period of heightened emotions where there's two people with cursed energy being used? Now, I would argue that it is the latter, based on Jogo's emotions of him crying, Kashimo's emotions of joy when facing off against Sukuna, and Choso's emotions of protecting his little brother, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of emotion going on whenever these kind of moments happen. However, Sukuna describes that this experience is something different, and he questions if this is Yuji's domain, to which Yuji answers he doesn't really know either, because he did this a little frantically, which I'm assuming he is talking about his domain expansion at this point, which I theorized that he was planning all along, but apparently this is like an off-the-cuff thing, which that's kind of cool. I'm not going to lie to you, I like that detail. But they go on a walk throughout the places of Yuji's childhood, with Yuji pointing out this particular statue right here, the Demon Swords Dance statue. Now, I tried searching for this across the interwebs. I couldn't find anything particularly of significance here. So if you do manage to find something that is like lore related, possible like mythology related, or like I don't know how to describe it, I'd love to see what that is about in the comments down below. Also, I'd love it if you followed me on Instagram, by the way. I'm posting regularly about manga that I've been reading over on the Instagram there. It's a little bit of a side project that I'm working on, so go follow me over there at NotDiamondMcQueeb, please and thank you. Anyways, Yuji and Sukuna continue their walks throughout the city here, and Yuji talking about how he moved around due to his gramps' work, and how much seeing the decline of the town didn't really shock him all too much. Now, throughout all of these little pieces of information, as I mentioned at the beginning of the series, at the beginning of this video, there is a common subtext and underlying theme behind all of them. All of this stuff isn't just surface level, which I'll get further into a little bit later on in the video. But these guys end up stopping at a park where they converse some more, and Yuji ends up pointing out the hydrangea flower, which he misnames as Morning Glory, and Sukuna ends up correcting him, calling him a fucking moron, which I personally love. I love the interactions between these two. But this is where JJK slips in the first subtle little Easter egg within these Japanese references and mythology and symbolism. Turns out the Japanese hydrangea was significant with heartfelt emotion and apology, and while in Europe it symbolizes arrogance and vanity. Now, I think this really fits the theme of this chapter overall. Yuji's trying to have a somewhat heartfelt conversation while Sukuna kind of displays arrogance almost towards him, and it's interesting how they both fit the symbolic meanings of the flower, both from different areas. I don't know, maybe it's obviously intentional, but it's definitely interesting. I do have some sort of crackpot theory for this. In folklore here of Japan, this flower was said to have been given to the family of a girl that someone loved, to apologize for neglecting her, to focus on his work instead, and to show her how much he really cared for her. Now, in my perfect little world here, Yuji ends up defeating Sukuna, and whatever comes after that, possibly the major, whatever, and he ends up returning to Ozawa to apologize for being so busy with work, which for him would be being a Jujutsu sorcerer, and they end up having a happy ending, because they already did have a date before Shibuya, and obviously Shibuya was just kind of like the nexus point within Jujutsu Kaisen. As soon as Shibuya kicked off, everything was just never the same after that. But moving further into this, Yuji questions Sukuna about knowing these flowers, these names, and Sukuna says maybe it's just from Megami's memories, and Yuji says, well, if you know all of that, then you must know about this place from my memories. However, Sukuna says that he didn't waste his time reading through each piece of meaningless drivel, which I find genuinely interesting, because Sukuna describes Yuji's memories as meaningless drivel here, but he chose to actively look and read through Megami's memories of flowers and their names. And I find it quite interesting that Sukuna deems which memories are quote-unquote meaningless drivel and which ones are kind of useful. I mean, what would a man, what would a creature, what would a deity like Sukuna gain from learning the name of a flower? I think that's kind of interesting, in my opinion. I do think that it just shows how much of a divide there actually is between Sukuna and Yuji, in comparison to how they view the world, basically, and how Sukuna views Yuji and how Yuji views Sukuna. I mean, Sukuna actively took an interest in Megami, but he constantly calls Yuji boring. I mean, he did it when Yuji entered the fight, so it's very interesting to see what's going on here. But we move a little bit further into the chapter, and we see Yuji and Sukuna catching crayfish, which Yuji, taking shots at Sukuna, says, what? Unless the strongest sorcerer in history can't catch some crayfish. Now, dialogue moments like this is something I've been genuinely looking forward to for a little minute here. It's almost like there's a weird brotherly bond going on here, and it felt like a breath of fresh air genuinely with getting this chapter, and I'd love for Yuji and Sukuna's 1v1 as it continues to evolve and go further. I would love to get more moments like this, genuinely, because it feels very similar, very reminiscent to Sasuke and Naruto. Every time they connected, we would get more flashbacks of their memories intertwining and them sort of figuring each other's feelings out. If Gege did something like this, wow, piece de la resistance. However, the crayfish here were very significant in the fact that within the Buddhist philosophy, crayfish often refer to the impermanence of existence, essentially. All seems solid and permanent like a crayfish shell, but eventually it disappears. And as I mentioned before, each conversation within this chapter here held between Yuji and Sukuna often has a common theme and a common subtext, and the theme throughout this entire series, throughout this entire conversation or this chapter, is the impermanence of things. And Yuji talks about how a swing set that he stubbed his toe on is no longer there, how a shopping center drove all the smaller businesses into closing, how the town was empty after Yuji had returned after a while of not being there for the funeral of his Gramps' friend. All of these conversations, they all have subtext, and basically the subtext is the changing of the times and how things seem like they'll always be there forever, but realistically they're just not. And even down to a field that Yuji used to catch grasshoppers in now seems to have less, and he questions if that's whether the pesticides have evolved or anything like that. So as I mentioned before, even though that this is a lot of yap from Yuji and Sukuna and has a lot of words, and you could easily hit the Duke Nukem I'm not leading all that type shit, it does seem like a lot of nothing burgers, but there is a lot of subtext and a lot of hidden meaning behind Yuji's words, and specifically a lot of hidden meaning within the artwork within here. We'll reference that a little bit later. But these references to impermanence don't just stop here, because Yuji stops at white horses, marveling at how he always forgets how big their heads are. However, within Japanese culture, horses are related to the cult of the rain. Now, I'm going to link all of the sources that I'm using for this kind of information in the description below, but they're offerings to a god, essentially, for varying results. Now, if you offer a black horse, for example, you're praying for rain. Now, if you offer a white horse when praying, you're praying for the rain to stop, essentially. And you could argue that this is Gege telling us how Sukuna is the rain, and the white horse symbolizes an offering to sort of stop that rain. Maybe that's crackpot theory, but there is definitely some symbolism going on heavily within this chapter here. And it's also worth mentioning that most of Yuji's major black flashes within the series happen when he is surrounded by a body of water or fallen water that often looks a lot like rain. It happened against Mahito on the final fight there, where they had that rain inside them. I don't know where they were, but they had that happening. The first ever black flash that he threw against Hanami, he happened while he was standing in a body of water, and the black flash that he landed on Sukuna right here also had him standing in water that was fallen, that made it look like rain. Now, going further into this, the two end up practicing some archery. To no one's surprise here, Sukuna is absolutely godly at this, and it's a little kind of reference to obviously Sukuna's fire arrow here, with Yuji saying, I forgot, you're from the era of actual archery here. And it's around about at this point where it starts to snow pretty heavily within the panels here, and snow is often related to the changing of seasons. Now, this also feels as if it is a nod to Yuji's I am you moment with Mahito, but snow obviously has a lot of symbology across many different cultures, so you can infer a lot from this, but it does definitely feel like a lot of references. I feel like a lot of this is very, very intentional on Gege's part here. Now, Sukuna does go on to say how he's had enough of Yuji's blathering, it's disgusting, and he says, tell me what you want to say. And it's right here we get into the real meat and potatoes of this chapter. And it's also worth pointing out how right here Yuji has a lot of dragonflies flying around him at this point, and there is a lot of symbology with dragonflies reflecting change and change in perspective and change of self-realization, which is genuinely a beautiful little nod here, given how Yuji's perspective has changed and shifted. We're now shown Yuji's granddad, Junpei Nanami, and Yuji talks about how he used to believe that he should simply live to fulfill his role as he understood it, and his role for him was a cog, a mindless soldier meant to kill cases and die taking Sukuna with him, and he thought that if he died like that, he could at least consider it a proper death. But just like the dragonflies symbolizing change, Yuji's mindset is changing, and it's signified heavily, or stated heavily, within this chapter, with him saying how he feels like that's not entirely correct. And he further talks about how many roles of people have, from varying from walking the dog to raising a family, to even talking about how even if you don't have anything like that, so long as you can eat shit and sleep, even if you're stuck in a bed sick, even if you spent your entire life with no connections and nothing remains of you, even if you spent your whole life with no connections and nothing remains of you, more than the memories in one's image, it's within the tiny little fragments that remain drifting off, where the value of a life lies. It never had anything to do with the ways people die. I just couldn't ever forgive those who acted as if that value didn't exist. It's these sentences right here that have so many incredible layers to it. Genuinely, like, this dialogue from Yuji deserves a video in and of itself, because I feel like it represents so much within the scope of Jujutsu Kaisen and the characters within it, and it is genuinely beautiful. I feel like Gege was truly flexing his writing pen with this one, rather than just like fights and sorcery and artwork. This felt like a genuine writing exercise from Gege, and I really enjoyed it. However, Yuji continues to say how he loathes Sukuna, but humans aren't tools. We're not born with any set role. And then going on to admit that he doesn't know whether humans are fundamentally good or evil. And I think that is a really good, strong point here, because a good majority of Jujutsu Kaisen is showing that humans are morally grey. There is no really truly good or truly bad humans. There's always something within this world. They're always crossing over in certain ways. Even the good guys have made acts that seem yikes, you know, and the bad guys have done stuff that makes you think, is he really bad, you know? So it does make you question everything that goes on within the series here. But Yuji goes on to say how he could just be doing the wrong thing here, but then he thought he'd at least show Sukuna the humanity of someone other than himself, of someone who he sees no value in. Honestly, this conversation, it's just simply beautiful. Like, genuinely, like, there is still a lot more here to dive into, but some details I do want to point out is when Yuji tells Sukuna that he loves him, we see Sukuna in his High form, and you can tell because of the shaved eyebrow. He's like, it's got the little slits on his eyebrow here. And also, when Yuji talks about humans not being tools with any set role, a pair of scissors is shown, which just so happens to be the thing that appears whenever Yuji uses his curse technique. Could this be significant? Maybe, maybe not. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about that one in the comments down below. There is a lot of symbolism, and I've tried to pick up on as much of this as I can, because honestly, this chapter was genuinely a perfectly 10 out of 10. But if you notice stuff that I missed, please let me know in the comments down below. However, this is where Sukuna goes on to tell Yuji, I don't feel a thing. I understand everything that you're saying, and yet it stirs no emotion within me. Just as you felt when you saw how the town had became, you had expected it. I feel absolutely nothing. Now, we'll circle back around to this in a minute because that is a very interesting statement from Sukuna, but Yuji replies with no daise, and Sukuna tells him about how his cowardice dumbfounds him, and says how is this his rage and hatred towards him? Is this all it amounted to? It's here that Sukuna recognizes that Yuji isn't showing Sukuna rage or hatred. It's compassion, it's sympathy, and it's pity. And that thought outright enrages Sukuna. When he asks Yuji if that's what he's doing, Yuji looks back at Sukuna with eyes that are now reminiscent of Sukuna's, but different at the same time. They're not that spiral. It's like controlled power. It's interesting to see what it is. They are different, but the same at the same time. And with Yuji telling Sukuna he can kill him. If he releases Megami and comes back to Yuji's body, he will spare his life. And this sentence right here, this sentence sends Sukuna over the fucking edge. Brimming with rage, he tells Yuji that such a gravely severe misconception. I will not stop at simply mincing you to bits, brat. In front of your eyes, I will slaughter each and every human you claim to be oh so valuable. And with that, he has emotion plastered all across his face. And it was emotion from Sukuna that, quite frankly, we have never ever seen in this series. It is sheer and utter rage. And I also want to point out that this little panel of Yuji here heavily reminded me of the scenes between Gon and Pito way back when in the old Hunter x Hunter anime there, in the Hunter x Hunter manga. But from this point on, I do truly believe we are going to see a Sukuna who is truly going all out. And what I mean by this is a Sukuna who is 100% rage-filled and is trying to kill, rather than just curious to see what his opponents can do. Because I think this is a callback to what Urumi said a couple of chapters ago, or more than a couple of chapters ago, about how Sukuna is yet to go all out. Now, what I will say is at this point, he has definitely been going out in one way. He's been using everything that he's got. He's used his domain, he's used his fire arrow, he's used everything that he has to his advantage, and he's used it well, right? But he has been approaching these fights from a perspective of curiosity rather than the intent to just outright kill these people. Because let's be real here, we all know that he could, right? We all know that he could, but a lot of these fights, he could have easily killed Maki. He could have easily just one-tapped Kusakabe, do you know what I mean? He's approaching these fights with curiosity rather than intent to kill. Again, just like the dragonflies signifying a perspective change for Yuji, I think that we will see that same thing from Sukuna. A change from curiosity to sheer fury and intent to kill. However, I do want to circle back to Sukuna telling Yuji how he feels nothing, because in my opinion, I believe what he meant here was that he just doesn't care or feel anything for Yuji and what Yuji tells him. Because Sukuna definitely sees value in people. The fact that Urumi and Kenjaku were allowed to exist around Sukuna for this long is absolutely a testament to that fact. And even outside of those two, Megami, Yuta, Higuruma, Gojo, and Maki even, all people who Sukuna has shown a massive interest into and ultimately found value from in his own unique little way here. But not through memories of people the same way that Yuji does find that value in humans, through combat. And I think at a core level, Sukuna just downright refuses to acknowledge what Yuji stands for. But I feel like it is also very, very reminiscent of the Yuji Mahito thing. I talked about this in a previous video, how there is a certain trifecta between Yuji, Mahito, and Sukuna that has definitely been shown and paralleled. Again, we've got another Mahito reference within this chapter here. There is definitely something going on within this little trifecta that I'm missing, and I will go back to try and find it. But I do believe from this point on right now, we are into seriously uncharted, straight 1v1 territory of Jujutsu Kaisen. But yeah, phenomenal chapter, 10 out of 10. Genuinely, there's a lot to break down in this chapter. Genuinely, like, really, really good chapter. But anyway, that is everything from me. If you've not already, please go sure to... No, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that is everything from me. If you've not already, please be sure to subscribe. Also, as of the time of this video, by the time this video is out, the merch store will be live. You can grab yourself a Weeb stamp hoodie or the Weeb OG. They're all live right now at weebclo.com. Go grab yourself some juice. I would much appreciate that. It helps support the channel, helps support me. helps keep the diaper fund topped up. Also, go follow my Instagram, go follow that, and also subscribe. Anyway, that's enough shameless shilling from me. I feel like I've been on my shilling YouTuber arc recently. Anyways, I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Much fucking love, big fucking kisses. Peace.